Welcome to the PCPer Mailbag. We are now on episode number 34. Kind of crazy how these things add up when you do it weekly. I'm recording this on Thursday evening of March 8th. Of course, this will be published on March 9th. Crazy how that production thing all works. So, as you know, PCPer Mailbag, we take questions from viewers like you, obviously, and answer them to our best or worst of our ability, depending on if you like us or not. But anyway, let's go to DBS7. I almost hate to ask, but with the new Ryzen APUs, what's the risk of miners buying these up? As I understand it, the CPU doesn't do much in a mining rig, so the new APUs might allow them to squeeze some extra GPU compute units in. I don't think it's going to be as big of a deal as graphics cards because AMD chugs out a lot of CPUs as it is, and their channel inventories are typically pretty full. And so if they start selling a bunch of these to miners, they're just going to make more, and we'll be like 6 or 8 weeks out of getting, big, significant new batches in greater numbers. I mean, they can adjust their production seemingly a whole lot easier than the GPU guys because it's just a CPU. I mean, they fab the die, they send it to the substrate guys, they mount it on a substrate and package it, and then they ship it out. They don't have to worry about other components. They don't have to worry about memory. They don't have to worry about power stuff. All of those things are handled obviously by the motherboard manufacturers and the memory guys. And as you know, memory prices are already pretty high. So, I mean, if miners do it, there's going to be plenty of memory sticks available and plenty of motherboards to shove Ryzen in. And you might only see a couple of weeks worth of low inventory of the parts if they become popular with miners. And then AMD probably can just jack up manufacturing and be able to get the channel filled again. So yeah, I'm not too terribly worried about it. It'd be nice. I mean, AMD would love it if miners decided to start doing this with their APUs. Of course, I mean they're going to be limited to one motherboard per APU, but you've got a couple other options there that. You can plug more graphics card into that APU machine, so it's not as big of a deal as the GPUs. So I wouldn't worry terribly much about it. Excuse me. Richard7047 asked, I have an old Packard Bell with an original Pentium CPU and an AT power supply that no longer works. Can I buy a modern power supply and use ATX to AT adapter cables, or would I need to buy an actual AT power supply to get the system working again? Well, you'd need an actual AT power supply, but they are still readily available and they're inexpensive. So $30 will get you a working AT power supply, and probably be only 200 watts to 300 watts. Probably 200 to 250 is fairly common for AT. So yeah, just get a new inexpensive AT power supply and be happy with your old Pentium. The stuff that I've got downstairs is still, oddly enough, ATX. So yeah, I have an MVP3 board. It's probably my oldest one from SUPoX, which we'll get to later. And yeah, that's cool that you were able to keep around an old AT Pentium based system. It's fun stuff. CDN Hammer asks, I have a Ryzen system with a single M.2 SSD slot on the motherboard. Would there be any noticeable performance issues if I added a second M.2 SSD via a PCIe adapter? In other words, would the same SSD model perform slower via the adapter compared to native motherboard slot? I'm specifically looking at the StarTech PEX4 M.2 E1. It's not going to make any real difference in performance. I mean, they all use PCIe lanes. Just make sure that when you plug it into the slot on your motherboard, it supports at least 4 by PCIe express lanes. If you have a 1 by lane or 1 by slot or 2 by slot or whatever, you're not going to have as much fun. It'll only use as many lanes as available. But yeah, just make sure that you shove it in something that has at least 4 lanes available to it, and you should be good to go. There'll be no real performance difference as compared to what is just sticking on there on the motherboard. So differences will be minimal at worst. And at best, it's going to be identical. So, Metallus Mueller asks, how long of a USB cable can I use before signaling issues become a problem? Are there any amps or repeaters that can help with these long runs? I'm primarily interested in a USB 2.0 cable for a keyboard. So let's look up here. USB 2.0 cable length. 16 feet 5 inches is the maximum length for USB 2.0 cable. The 2.0 specifications limits the lengths of cable between USB 2 devices to about 5 meters. So, there's your answer. 5 meters, 16 feet. Do you think that's enough for you? I don't know of any real repeaters. The only thing that would be that would probably work would be a powered USB hub. Those things are inexpensive. So if you need 32 feet of cable, you can use a powered USB hub to get that as far as you need. An interesting question, something I hadn't thought of before. Wood Doctor. SUPoX, the successor to EPOX, still sells motherboards. Why are they not in the USA market? That's an excellent question. Going back to EPOX. EPOX was a pretty popular brand around VP2 and MVP3 times. And they still sold motherboards up into, I think, through socket A and AM2, I believe. And then they just kind of wasted away. And yeah, SUPoX it's China only right now, but it's a bunch of the EPOX employees. And I have no idea why they're not in the USA market. They're probably just looking at it and thinking, okay, there's MSI, there's Asus, there's Gigabyte. There's a handful of other manufacturers, but you don't see DFI in the US anymore. ABIT went away. There's just a bunch of other motherboard manufacturers that they used to be thick as flies. I mean, Taiwan used to have the only US based manufacturing of motherboards. They kind of slowed that down. I think that they actually closed that, and now they make everything entirely in Taiwan and China. You only see them in high-end server stuff anymore. They got out of the consumer market. It's just cutthroat. It's other than those big three, you don't see a whole lot. I mean, you don't hear about Jetway very much anymore. Gosh, so many motherboards. Supermicro, they only do high-end stuff. God, I can't even think of Soltec. That was one. So many that have gone out of the market just because it's cutthroat. And going up against those big three is always hard. And even some of the other niche players and smaller second-tier and third-tier guys, I mean, they're all trying to push out as many motherboards as possible into the market, but yeah, I'd imagine they're just going to concentrate on China, and if the opportunity and their numbers get to a point where they can address other markets, they'd probably do other Asian countries first and break into the US market much, much later, but we'll see. I loved EPOX boards. They were great overclockers for the time. Their MVP3 offerings were fantastic. Still got a working one downstairs running a K62 Plus. So That's pretty cool. I'd like to see more competition there, but what can you do? Joel Luthi asks, Global Foundries licenses 14 nanometer intellectual property from Samsung, but a source has told me that they won't be licensing Samsung 7 nanometer process IP. Wouldn't it be very difficult for Global Foundries to not use any of the 14 nanometer IP they got from Samsung to jumpstart their production of 7 nanometer? Especially considering how much difficulty Intel has had with 10 nanometer. Now, process technology is it's weird. It's a little bit of alchemy, some magic in there, a lot of science, but you have to look at this and consider that everybody uses a lot of the same tools. So a lot of the optics are all the same. A lot of the deposition machines, etching, litho, everything. They're the only handful of companies make these machines. And so they install them, and the guys then kind of develop their own process in how the layers are deposited, or how many litho, not layers, but passes they have to make. I mean, they're doing triple patterning, quad patterning, EUVs coming up, and that's just going to be a it's so much easier than quad patterning. You don't need to do any kind of patterning. It's just EUV. You're gonna go into your litho stage and lays everything out. So it's hard to say why Intel is having the problems that they are at 10 nanometer. I mean, they design these processes and they design these geometries and say, okay, we've got to be able to make sure that these geometries work, that we get the transistor switching performance. I mean, we got to mix and match our materials. We have to do things with compression and strain. And so when you add all these things together, it's not like it's so totally different from one node or one process type to another. It's just kind of how they put all these different parts together and get it working. And so Global Foundries have been working on their own 7 nanometer since they canceled their own 14 nanometer process. It was like called FDX or something like that. They didn't have very much luck with their own, and that's when they licensed Samsung's and worked with them and got everything working on their machinery. And they've obviously learned things from that, and they're applying these things to their next generation nodes. But there are going to be similarities between what Samsung does and what Global Foundries does, just because there's only so many ways to skin a cat, I guess. Or is it more than one way to skin a cat? But the same idea is they're using a lot of the same machines, a lot of the same tools, a lot of the same software even that does control and whatnot. And so you can only do so much that will be different. But, what is going to be different is going to be their design libraries. They're going to have slightly different electrical characteristics just because of the way they build up transistors, how they're doing FinFETs, how many FinFETs are in, a transistor design. It's just a lot of mixing and matching technologies to get to there. And you say, Josh, you're full of hogwash, and that's probably true, but we're still dealing with physics here. We all live in the same world, same tools, same optics. All those things are very much the same in between the different manufacturers. It's just getting it all together into working products. So it's not a big deal. Global Foundries have done their own process nodes before, and they'll do it again. And so it looks like they're doing a lot better at 7 nanometer than they did with their own 14 nanometer before they went to Samsung. So that's good, and we'll see how they do, especially going into EUV. Jeremy Worcester. I haven't been here for a while, so what's the story of the supa-pipe joke? Well, many, many years ago, MSI, they brought out their first super GPU coolers, and they had the supa-pipe. They were the first guys that had, the bigger It was like a 10 millimeter heat pipe design that they used, and they called it supa-pipe. And it was back when we were doing the podcast on Twit Network, Leo Laporte's outfit, and Colleen was there, and I was doing a review, and I said, yeah, and they got this thing called the supa-pipe. And Colleen piped up after that with supa-pipe, and everybody started talking about supa-pipe. And anytime you'd see a heat pipe on any motherboard or graphics card, supa-pipe came out. And I think that we just kind of lost track of that one. It was a fun thing to talk about. So that's where supa-pipe came from. It's not a very interesting story, but I'm going to live a very interesting life. Anthony Lamb, 1976. I recognize that name. Would you kindly elaborate on this very important subject? Burgers. What are the best and worst burgers you can remember consuming? Boy, some of the best burgers. Back in the 80s when Fuddruckers was still new, they had great burgers. The place I get from here in Laramie, it's called Born in a Barn. They have burger specials all the time with just crazy burger builds. A lot of their regular stuff is fantastic as well. And so those are really good burgers. I've had a couple of Wagyu burgers in the past, and those tend to be pretty decent. I don't like Red Robin as much. I think that they put so much salt in all of their stuff, it kind of ruins the flavor. But, your mileage is going to vary there, I guess, from place to place. The worst burgers got to be McDonald's Quarter Pounders. They're just, I don't see how people can eat those things. They're just nasty. I can do a Big Mac, but their Quarter Pounders, awful. And there have been a few times in my life when I've bit into a burger at a couple of places where it's still bleeding, and you think I'm going to the ER in about 12 hours. And then, on the other hand, you get to places who are just so freaking out about any kind of food-borne pathogen that they make them into hockey pucks. So that's not any fun. Nobody likes a well-done burger, or at least you shouldn't. But yeah, those are the examples of the worst burgers I've had. I think one of the best ones that I've ever had was seriously Born in a Barn. Their Hayfire, which is a masterpiece of really hot burger with great flavor. It's fantastic. And there was a special some time ago with like pulled pork, and I can't remember, it was some kind of Carolina mustard. It was amazing. Just, yeah, makes you salivate just thinking about it. So there you go, burgers. We talked about burgers. Pixelated Donkey, what's a question that the PCPer staff wants to ask their audience? Why in the hell do you stick around? I mean, we're not that funny. We're not that smart. I'm still confused as to why you people watch us. So yeah, leave an answer. Why? Why did you suffer brain damage as a child? Do you have just nothing better to do? Do you like slightly older, chubby, bald guys? Not that there's anything wrong about that. Rad Active Lobster asks, Josh, if you and Ryan found yourself stranded in Asia at the end of a tech conference and had to fight to the death over the final plane ticket home, who would win? What would your strengths and weaknesses be? Well, Ryan's a little younger than me, but I'm sneakier and trickier, and I do have a little mass on him. And plus, he can't be too far away from a bathroom, and so we can work through that thing. So I think my strength is that I am older and more experienced in getting my own way in a semi-passive aggressive measure. So sure, and passive aggressive is also a primary weakness because anyway, funny stuff. But yeah, I'd win. Or I would just maybe get a ticket to Thailand instead, and he can go home. Anyhow, that is the PCPer mail bag. Number, what did I say it was? 34? Thanks for watching, and have a good night or day.